What's going on, collective listeners? Welcome back for another episode. Today we have Dallas Skipper. She is an assistant strength coach at Rice University down in Texas. She is a true Texan. So we got an awesome podcast for you today. She's going to kind of take us through a little different perspective on kind of the way she came about, some of the foundation that she built her programming from, and the way that she kind of views athletic performance. And she also kind of gives us a little bit of a take on, what it's like to really go through and kind of hash out some of the ways that she views her collaboration with some of the other people that she's working with, whether it be coaches, athletes, athletic trainers, and everything, and that is involved obviously in her operation at Rice. So awesome episode. Dallas is awesome. She's a great conversation, just a great person overall. So I really think you guys are going to enjoy this one. Let's get to it. What's going on, collective listeners? Welcome back for another episode. Appreciate you guys tuning in. This is the Samson Strength Coach Collective podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Anthony Grasso. Today, we are joined by Dallas Skipper, who is the assistant strength and conditioning coach at Rice University. And she's going to go through, and we're going to try to do a little template here of trying to allow the, person I'm interviewing to tell their story as opposed to me kind of rambling on and providing all this background information on them. I think that's cool, but I think a lot of other podcasts do that. And, here at Samson, we're trying to be on the cutting edge of things, we're super forward thinking, but so that being said, Dallas, welcome. Why don't you take us, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of take us through your story.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. First off, just wanted to get that out there and say
that. No doubt. Thanks for being on.
So my name is Dallas Skipper. I'm currently at Rice University. So a little bit about me. I actually got my bachelor's and my master's degree from the University of North Texas. So that's up in Denton, like the Dallas, Fort Worth area. I interned while I was getting my master's, probably for about, I think, a year and a half. So I was there, I worked with everybody. I had women's tennis, I helped with football, kind of just where I was needed. I kind of filled in and helped. After I was there for about a year and a half, I got an opportunity to go up and work with football at the University of Kansas with Coach Woodfin, Jack Wilson, Stuart Young. So went up there, great experience. I was there for probably about 6 months. The season finished, and then I kind of came home looking for a place, and then COVID hit.
All right, perfect timing.
So that, perfect, right? So that kind of put a hold on everything. Like, I was kind of struggling finding a job a little bit, and then COVID hit. So I guess if there was a time to not have a job, I guess that was kind of good timing because nobody was really working.
That's true. Yeah.
So kind of continued with that, went through the summer, and I was actually able to pick up a part-time assistant job at Wingate University, which is a D2 up in North Carolina. It's in Wingate, which is probably about like 50 minutes from Charlotte. So it was up there for a semester. And then after that, I was able to get an opportunity as like a professional intern at Texas A&M under Ray Ellsworth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. So that was super fun. And then after that, I was there for probably about 6 or 7 months. And then this opportunity popped up. I interviewed, and I actually was like given the position and accepted it. And I've been at Rice for the past year now. Yeah. So I have volleyball and women's soccer, and then I kind of assist and supervise with track and field.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's I appreciate that. And congratulations, obviously, on, number one, making it through COVID, and two, obviously finding and landing the spot at Rice. That's pretty cool. I didn't know you went to Texas A&M. That's pretty sweet. How long was that period for? Was that
from January of, what year is it? 2022. My years are all confused.
It is.
So I guess it was January to July of 2021. So I was there through that spring semester, and then I helped kind of in the summer a little bit until I came down here to Houston.
Okay, cool. And that's College Station, Texas, right? Is that where that is?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that, and now, so are you from Texas, or are you?
I am from Texas. So I'm originally from Amarillo. I'm sure people might have heard it in the George Strait song.
Absolutely.
Amarillo by morning.
Amarillo by morning. That's what I'm thinking. We listen to that song all the time.
If you've been on I-40, you've probably passed through there. You've seen the Cadillac Ranch. You've seen the 72-ounce steak. That's another big Amarillo thing. Yeah. The big Texan. So from up there, pretty far, but I guess I'm still in the same state, but it doesn't really feel like it because we're so far away.
Yeah. So where is Amarillo? Like, obviously, like, I think of Amarillo exactly like I love George Strait. I think most people who listen to country music do, but like, the way he describes it in the song, like, you would think it's this like magical place. I mean, he wrote a song about it, right? So like, is that like, is Amarillo like a big place, small place? Is it like cool, or what is it like?
So I would say, obviously compared, like, I'm down here in Houston where there's like over 2 million people. So nothing even close to that. But in terms of like, that is technically considered the panhandle. They call it that because literally it looks like the handle of a pan, right? Like that, the skinny part of Texas. So it's probably the biggest city in that area. Lubbock is probably 100 miles south, but that's where Texas Tech is at. But Amarillo is probably the biggest city kind of in that area. Really? I wouldn't say it's super amazing or big or anything, but it is home and I do love it.
So where is that located in Texas? Is that like southern Texas, northern Texas, or is that?
So yeah, it's technically, it's hard because like North Texas is technically the Dallas area and West Texas is technically like Midland, Odessa. But it would be considered the panhandle. So if you think about it, right, like you've got Texas up at the top, it kind of squares off, and then you've got Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana. That's the panhandle, right in that little square up there. So I think we're about 45 minutes from Oklahoma, 45 minutes from New Mexico. So we're up at the very top. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's it. And so it's like, I mean, when I think of like Texas, I think it's like most people who, you know, are not from Texas, we like romanticize about like high school football, right? We're like, oh, like, you know, Friday Night Lights, and we've seen the movie and the show and like everything else that comes with, you know, Texas high school football. Was it like that big of a deal, like in Amarillo? I'm assuming it's pretty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was like,
it's a real big deal. And I think because it's smaller up there, right, there's not like, and obviously it's grown over the years, but like when I was in high school, there's not really a ton to do, right? You hang out with your friends, you play sports. So like, yeah, we had like the huge pep rally every Friday for the football team, like the whole school's there. Like Friday Night Lights, it was the big thing. So I definitely grew up I guess in an interesting situation because I thought football was like that everywhere. And then I saw like pep rallies and different stuff from other places, and I was like, oh, maybe it's a little bit different up here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing you didn't end up coming to UConn, because I think it would have completely changed your perception of football in totality. You know, so I mean, for all intents and purposes, you know what I mean? So yeah. Because just to give a little background for the listeners. So obviously, I Dallas and I crossed paths when you were interviewing for what position was it? Was it a professional intern spot that was available at the time, I think?
Yeah, so I think it was with football and lacrosse, I want to say.
Yeah, so then that was,
it was
at that
football
time,
and maybe women's lacrosse.
Yeah, because at that time that was the professional intern spot, and I think there was like the assistant spot above that was still handling women's lax as well. So and obviously like full, you know how I felt. Obviously, I wanted to hire you, and I wanted you to obviously go, hop on our staff. I thought you would have fit in really well, especially with our women's lax team, and they're awesome. Obviously, shout out UConn women's lax. But I think you kind of found your way in a little bit better of a sense. So yeah, no, that's awesome. And so we are talking to a true Texan. I do feel that I can hear it in your voice. And so was it weird going to North Carolina? Like because obviously North Carolina is still considered, like for someone like myself from Connecticut, I consider North Carolina the South, right? So like was it like this isn't the true South for me? Because I'll talk to people like from South Carolina, and they'll be like, I don't consider Texas the South, and I'm like, what does that mean? How it's like one of the most southernmost points of our state, of our country, so what was it like in North Carolina?
See, it's a little different, and that's kind of funny that you say that, right? Like Texas isn't the South, because you do get kind of like mixture of views down here. People are like, no, Texas is the South, whatever. Like my perspective is like Texas is Texas, right? Like it's kind of different than anywhere else, anywhere you go. And I think that's partially because it's so big and has so many people and so many different types of places, right? Like exactly like Amarillo to Houston, they're in the same state, but like pretty polar opposites, right? Then you've got like East Texas and you've got El Paso. So it was a little bit, right? Like I was expecting it to be like I don't know what I was expecting, I guess. Maybe I was like, oh, North Carolina, it's kind of the north, right? Like, oh, Northeast, right? Like when I looked it up on a map, I was like, oh, it's like over there. Like it's kind of further over. And when I got there, it was a lot more southern kind of than I thought. And I was in a pretty small spot. Like Wingate was like more of a conservative area. I know like obviously Charlotte is a little bit more like liberal and it's a bigger city. But I think surprised that it was as southern as it was, I guess. Like I think I was expecting more. I mean, and it's compared to Texas, it's like, so I think it's like a 22-hour drive. So I was really expecting to get up there and be like, I'm in the north, and it really wasn't. It was like, oh, you're kind of, but you're still in the South.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel too out of place up there, even though I was super far away.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And so do you still have a ton of family down in Texas? Is that where most of
yeah, my whole family lives in Amarillo.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good.
So,
at least you ended up in the state, you know what I mean? And do you plan on kind of staying in Texas and continuing there? Is that kind of the goal?
I love it, but I think that's hard to say sometimes, right? Like people are like, oh, I can only stay in Texas. And there's a lot of schools in Texas, but I think like I went to North Carolina and I went to like Lawrence. So I'm definitely open to that. And it's kind of funny because Lawrence is closer to Amarillo than Houston is.
Sure. Yeah.
And you have to go through 2 states to get there.
That's so interesting.
So yeah. So definitely like love Texas. It's my home. It'll always be my home, but not necessarily glued here. I'm kind of happy with where I'm at. Besides the heat down here, Houston is pretty nice.
How hot is it there right now?
Let's see. It says it's 95 right now. Probably feels about 101, 102 if I had to guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we're getting a heat wave up here, and I know it's nothing compared to what you guys have down there, but I'm like, man, I like the heat. I like everything. Like I like really hot. I like really cold. I like, I really don't like spring. I feel like spring has no identity. The fall is awesome. You know what I mean? But like everything else is pretty cool. But no, that's awesome. And I'm really glad. And this is why I'm like super happy that you actually hopped on the podcast. Is I'm like, it is true. Like it's awesome how things come full circle. And it's cool to see how you've obviously kind of progressed through the field, and it's and I remember at one point, I think it was JD. We were talking about potentially going to Georgia State, and I tried to give him your name, so ever since I met you, I was trying to just like get your name out there. So it's cool that you're able to hop on the podcast. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about like at what point through this journey you kind of had an idea that like becoming a coach, right? Like not even necessarily strength and conditioning, but just like becoming a coach was something that you wanted to pursue, right? Like when we start there in the journey process. Yeah.
Yeah. So like when I went to get my bachelor's degree, I actually have my bachelor's. It's a bachelor's of science. At North Texas, they call it allied health, pre-professional. Mm-hmm. So it's basically for people that want to go to PT school, OT, stuff like that. So I was going to school to be a physical therapist. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the plan out of high school. Like, okay, great. This sounds like something I want to do. Went through it. I took all the class, like all the basic classes, started taking like the upper level, like exercise science classes. And then I think my senior year in the fall, I was able to get kind of like, not an internship, but kind of just shadowing, right? Like at a PT clinic. So I would go kind of watch, observe. And once I got there and I was kind of into it, I was like, this isn't what I was expecting, right? Like, and I think kind of like, it's hard, especially, like my thought, like thinking PT and thinking that was like really on the sport PT side. So it's like, oh, I'm going to be working with athletes, all this stuff. Right. And then you get into like a actual physical therapy setting, right? Just like a regular, right? It's a lot of like elderly people, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of like shoulders, knees, hips, stuff like that. So like I observed, I finished the semester and I was kind of like in panic mode, like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if I want to do that. Right. Like, especially because PT school, like it is such an extensive application process, right? Yeah. Like, and it's super competitive. It's super hard to get in. And then it's 3 years of school. So kind of like my brain, right? Like I'm pretty set. Like at least in my opinion, I can figure out if I'm going to like something or not pretty quick. Yeah. Like it's not one of those like, oh, like give it. Yeah, I'll give it a little bit of time. But for the most part, my first instinct is kind of like, okay, I like this or I don't like it. Yeah.
That's a good quality to have.
So
sure.
Sometimes. So kind of did that and was kind of just like lost a little bit, I guess. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got one more semester. So I had already signed up for classes. I had to take one more semester. I think I was taking like 15 hours. And I was kind of like, well, what do I want to do? Kind of looking for classes. And North Texas offered like intro to strength and conditioning class. It was just an elective. I didn't need it. I took it anyways, like probably not the smartest idea because I was taking 18 hours my last semester. But like went into it and like my first day, I was kind of like, okay, like this is a little bit more of the area that I'm kind of looking for, right? Like I grew up playing sports, like I've lifted weights since I think like the 6th or the 7th grade. Not well. I'm not saying I'm any.
I see all your, I see you have those Olympic lifting videos that you post on Instagram. I keep in track with those. Yeah, no, you're getting after it. I'm trying. Yeah. So once I kind of saw that, it was kind of like, okay, right. Because I think the main reason I got into PT was to be able to help people, right? Like be able to help people, motivate people, inspire people to get better. Right. And then when I kind of saw strength and conditioning, I was like, oh, like
this is more on the side I want to be, right? Because a lot of PT, like for the most part, is like injury rehabilitation, right? Like
Sure.
usually by the time you're in physical therapy, you've either got an issue that you're trying to work through, or you've had a big issue that you're not trying to recover from,
Sure.
right? And when I first saw strength and conditioning, I was like, oh wow, like this is the same thing. It's just the opposite side. It's the prevention part, right? Like if we're doing these things correctly and we're learning how to do this, like, yeah, there's always needs for PTs. I'm not saying like we wipe out everybody else because of how great we are, right? And not under any illusion that that is the truth.
Sure.
But I think kind of being able to see it from that perspective and be like, wow, like I can do what I'm passionate about, but in a very different way.
Yeah.
And then after that, it just felt very comfortable. Like I felt comfortable lifting. Like I felt comfortable in a weight room. I really enjoyed it. And then from there, I was kind of like, okay, like this is what I want to do. How do I build on it from there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, it's almost like PT, maybe athletic training, right? You talk about like, whether it's like, people are like, oh, this is prehab, or this is rehab, or this is like, you know, performance, or whatever it is. And I think it's really all just kind of like I don't know if like a spectrum is the best word to use it, but it's just kind of like
a sliding scale.
Yeah. That's exactly it. That's what that's kind of what I'm thinking. Cause I'm like myself, well, you know, strength training and PT, everything is requiring like some sort of torque or force to be placed on bone, right? You're trying to like stress the system, whether it's in like a low mechanical sense or super high, whatever it is, you know. It's just, I think, you know, from a performance perspective, you were probably someone who wanted to stress the system and you know, more on the high performance side of things, right? You weren't necessarily worried about, and you know, it's funny because I think like as you like kind of, it's cool that you got that experience, because I mean, would you say that like you said, you understand the value that PT can potentially provide and the people who are providing it, right? Because I think, especially as you get older, you start to think, well, okay, we're like right now I'm like working with a little more of the Gen Pop area, right? So I'm like, okay, my perspective has changed a little bit. I'm starting to think about like, what type of impact and value can I provide for people who don't have like all of these answers from all of these people who want to impart their wisdom on them every day, which is what the Division I collegiate athlete has, right? There's no shortage of people trying to get their hands on, you know, the athlete and get more time with them. And, you know, whatever it is, whether it's a sport coach or the PT or their, you know, their academics, whatever it is, you know, everybody wants, you know, more time with the athlete. And then it's like, you're not an athlete anymore and no one cares about you, right? It's like, yeah, we had an overload of information before, and now it's like, oh, now we have zero guidance around how you should live the rest of your life, right? And the idea is like,
absolutely,
you know, obviously you're in a situation where you can provide that value. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Like the way that you're able to provide some of that value now, right? Like you obviously have been working at, you know, at Rice for a little bit and you've had some time in the field. It's like, how do you feel like maybe the way that you provide value now is a little different than the way you sort of perceive the way you would provide value in the beginning, would you say?
Yeah. Like, so I think, right, like at first, like when you get started, and I think kind of everybody, it's like strength and conditioning, right? Like, it's like, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. Okay. What do I care about? I care about strength and I care about conditioning, right? Like, and I think like when I first started out, it was so focused on just like the X's and O's, right? Like, okay, we got to lift hard. We got to do this. And like, as time has evolved, right? And I think like my boss, like Coach Crash, he's been here about 10 years, great guy, like awesome boss, probably won't ever have a better one to be completely honest. He's great. But I think he's really helped me kind of shift my perspective a little bit and realize that like at the end of the day, we are like a sports performance coach, right? Like we are here like for athletic performance, not just strength and conditioning, right? Like athletic performance is a much broader spectrum as opposed to strength and conditioning, right? Like athletic performance, at least to me, right? That includes a lot of like, yeah, we're lifting, we're conditioning, we're doing that stuff. But it's also like, how do you move when you actually play the sport that you're playing, right? Like, what does that look like? How are you taking care of yourself? Okay, like that's a big part of performance, right? Is like, what are you doing when you're not doing the actual sport or whatever else? Like, what are you doing to make sure that you can be sufficient in what you're doing, right? So I think there's a lot of different pieces. And I think now it's like, really kind of being able to shift that over, right? And not just look like, yeah, I'm looking at what we're doing in the weight room and I'm looking at like the field work or the court work that we're doing, but I'm also looking like, okay, like what does practice look like today? What is practice going to look like tomorrow? How can I like help us get the most out of what we're doing without, right? And that might be, sometimes we push it a little more. And like, that also means kind of like, maybe we don't push it a little bit more, right? Like that's maybe pulling back a little bit when you need to. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, is kind of just broadening my outlook, right? Instead of just strength and conditioning, more of like athletic performance. Cause I think there are a lot of different factors that go into that. And I think sometimes they kind of get overlooked because we're so concerned about, okay, well, how much are we squatting or cleaning, or like, how hard are we running? Do we make our times, right? Yeah, like that stuff is important, and it's fundamental in strength and conditioning. But I think there's a lot of other pieces that you kind of have to take a step back and look at, because I think those other pieces really kind of help the fundamentals of strength and conditioning.
Yeah, that's a great answer. At least, to me, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And and I'm like sitting here listening to you talk. I'm like, this is exactly why I wanted to hire her. She crushes her interviews. She just crushed the interview. No, that's awesome. I really do appreciate that answer. Yeah, I think it's really great perspective to have. I mean, well, how old are you now? You're not in your 30s, are you?
No, I'll be 29 in September.
Yeah. So I always feel like it's around that time, maybe a little bit, earlier. You probably started to realize this earlier. It's like, yeah, it's a little bit more than, what the actual title of the position suggests, right? And the things that we need to consider, right? It's around, you start to have a little bit more of a zoomed out perspective, where it's like the X's and O's certainly matter, but to what extent, and where can I like reach in a little bit further and maybe get a little bit more out of my athlete? And maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm reaching in the physical sense, right? Like maybe it's like, hey, I'm having a conversation with them on the side. It's going to provide them with a little bit more of a sense of comfort in, trusting me and, my guidance and the guidance that I can provide for them. And then maybe that, kind of puts them in an environment where they feel like they want to give more, right? And maybe that leads to some sort of greater gains in whatever it is that you guys are trying to, whatever stimulus you're trying to achieve. So that's just like a small example, but so kind of going with that, right? Like I never got a chance to actually coach with you, right? So like, what if you had to describe like your coaching style, like early on, right, when you were younger versus now? Has it changed? Is it a little bit more the same? How would you kind of go about describing that?
That's a good question. I think like when I started coaching, like I think that is something that always came natural, right? Like I never felt like I had to really, really try to coach things. Like it kind of felt like, well, like that doesn't look right. How can we fix it? Like I might not have really known like why it didn't look right or what I was doing to fix it. Right. But like that's kind of how you learn when you first start out. Right. Like I think when I first started interning, they gave me the injured kids. Yeah. They're like, hey, you're with the return to play kids, you know what I mean? Because like, and I think they do that with a lot of interns, kind of like, okay, let's put them with some people that they can't really mess up, right? Yeah. But that kind of gave me an idea, like I can watch, okay, well, they can't do this, let's try to do this. Okay, why does it look like that? Well, maybe try this. Yeah. And then you see, did it fix it? Did it not? And I think I still have the same like outlook on that, right? Like I think everybody's different, and I think you kind of have to take some consideration. But I think just trying to just be more like, I think you said at the beginning, like clear and concise, right? I think that's the biggest key, is like I can tell you all this stuff and I can give you 15 things, but like, are you going to remember 14 of them? Probably not, right? Like there's a lot of stuff going on in a weight room. There's a lot of like things happening, and there's quick turnover in between sets. So I think just like still being able to kind of look at that, right? Now I have a little bit better of idea. Okay, oh, well, it looks like that because of this. Let's try this instead. Sure. Or I don't like the way that looks. Let's modify it and do something else. Yeah. And I think just being able to kind of adapt, right? Because I think everybody does it, right? It's like when you first start out and you write this program, it's like, okay, like we have to do every single thing on this program, every single set, every single rep. If we don't, it's a failure, right? Like, oh, we didn't get anything out of it. And I think as I've like progressed and I've gotten older, it's like, okay, like there's some give and some take in that, right? Like you can't just like, okay, yeah, we didn't do one of our accessory exercises. Not all hope is lost. We're okay. You know what I mean? Like there are ways we get into that. And that's, kind of what I look at. If we look like, and it's hard because like I have volleyball right now and I have them 4 days a week and I have an hour. I have them from 6 to 7 a.m. And that includes warm up, any type of conditioning or plyos, and a lift. Right. Nice. So like, that's kind of, quite the time management skills right there. So, like that's kind of something I like to think about. Okay, we're going to do this today. All right. Okay, now we're going in for the lift. Okay, we've got 25 minutes left. We are on the first thing. That's when I kind of go down and look, okay, well, maybe we don't need this. We touched some of that in the warm up. Okay, well, we can't do this today, but I know we're going to get something similar tomorrow. Let's pair that with something else. And so I think just kind of being able to like give and take, right? Take those pieces, put them in different places, and just be able to adjust. Because I think if you're so set on only doing exactly what you've written, you're going to cause a lot of frustration to yourself, right? And then it almost causes the kids sometimes to feel a little bit flustered and rushed, right? Like there's nothing worse than feeling like you're being rushed through doing something.
Right.
Right. And then you're rushed through something. And then what are you more concerned about? You're more concerned about finishing than maybe what it looks like or how it is. Right.
Yeah.
So then you're like, well, we got everything done, but did it look good? You know, up for debate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, because I think it's like, to say, if it's like, all right, well, and I think like the technical model, right? Like we get so, like you said, worked up about that. It's like you put together this plan, and the plan, it's like, I think a lot of people knock like that initial moment when it's like, yeah, we think we're like these like mad scientists behind, in some lab or whatever. But I do think that it just, like, there are people who care, and there are people who really want to put a lot of thought into the programming, and to give, have a lot of understanding and justification around why they put what, where, and how much, and all that stuff. And I was definitely, and still am, one of those people, admittedly. And I think it takes time to sort of get to a point where, like, my brother is a mechanic, and we'll be out in the garage and I'll watch him go through something like, well, this is what the book says we're supposed to do in this situation, but it's just not happening right now. You know what I mean? This part doesn't fit. Like, that's like the running joke in like in the automotive world, is my brother's always like, yeah, nothing ever works and nothing ever fits. You know what I mean? The part is always wrong. It's always something, right? And I'll be out in the garage. I'll be like, Aunt, you got to run back to Advance. This is the wrong part, or this isn't going to fit. We need to fix something else. And a lot of the times he'll just be like, you know what? Don't even go to Advance. I'm going to put some makeshift thing in this thing, and we're going to get it going. Kind of, you know what I mean? And I think that that's sort of like the skills, right? And I was talking to you about it this weekend in the garage, because we were doing this job, and he was like, yeah, usually this job will take me X amount of time, but people will have to pay a certain price for this. Right. And I think about it, and I'm like, yeah, well, he was like, dude, it used to take me so long to do these, so long. Right. And I'd be like, yeah, no doubt. And like, you just take me so long to program, and it would take you so long to try. And it gets to a point where it's like, you're getting paid for the efficiency and the level of skill at which you can implement these things. And I think, that's what you're probably experiencing now, right? To get to a point where it's like, all right, I got an hour. Maybe we want to sprint a little bit, and we're going to hit some things in the warm up. And then, as opposed to me trying to get them through some sort of like Olympic lifting movement, some sort of squat pattern, and some sort of accessory work, it's like, hey, we're going to hit some Olympic lifting movement. You're going to squat, and then you're going to get out of here. Cause it's like, I'd rather you just spend your time and actually get something out of this particular stimulus, as opposed to us trying to like rush through and get everything in, just so that we can say that we got it in. And the reality is, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I'm like, as you're talking, I'm like, they might even benefit more from not doing the dang accessory work, because you're thinking to yourself, it's just like, after what point are you saying like, you're just, your system's just being driven down now? We don't even need to do this stuff anymore. We already hit what we need to hit, So no, that's great. That's great perspective. And that's interesting that you notice that about the players. I don't think I ever really thought about that. Like, the athletes getting flustered, feeling like, oh, they must, like, our coach really wants us to get these movements in. And I can tell they're getting worked up about us not having the time to get it done.
Yes.
So if I don't get it in, this must mean that I'm not achieving what I need to achieve in terms of my performance. Is that kind of like what you were referring to?
Yeah. And it's like, right, like sometimes they're like, I mean, have you ever been like pushed through a workout? Like, have you ever been someone like, okay, faster, okay, finish, got, like, it's, like you're like, give me, give me a second. Like,
give me my 5 minutes in between squats. I need my 5.
Yeah. And it's, like, give me, let me get on my phone. Let me let me think about what I'm going to have for breakfast,
Exactly.
But like, I think like that's frustrating, because then like, you know what I mean? Like, obviously we want a good work pace and we want to get those things done. But I think like at a certain extent, like, the pace is too much, right? Like, I think sometimes people are like, oh yeah, we have great work tempo. Okay. And then like, you watch some of the reps that are going on, and you're like, yeah, of course the tempo is great. They're not doing it correctly. Yeah. Like, it's really easy to run through something really quick when you're doing it like halfway. Yeah. So I think that's just something, right? Like, and especially like working with the girls, like, they kind of know how I am. Like, they know I'm very much like on time. And that's something, right, I think is important. Like, when I tell you the workout's going to be from 6 to 7, it's going to be from 6 to 7. It's not like, oh, you're here from 6 to 7:12. Like, that's not how I do things, right? Like, I'm honest with you, and I'm trying to be like upfront, and I tell you how long it is. I have to keep my word, right? Because I think that goes into a lot of things. If I can't keep my word on that, what else can I not keep my word on? You know what I mean? So it's like, sometimes we have to cut things out. Hey, like, that might be something like, hey, we got 4 minutes left. Try to get one round in. Sure. Right. Something easy that we can do at our rack. Hey, we got these 4 things left. We're going to cut out these 2. Let's really focus on these 2 little things right here and just knock them out in this, 6 or 7 minutes that we have left. Sure. That way, we're still getting some of the work in, right? Like, some of those other things I can probably take out and we get in some other form during the week. But that's kind of how I look at things, is like, especially as you go, and you kind of look back on the week, like, I'm just checking boxes, right? Sure. Like, I want this, and that. Okay, cool. Like, where do I put them? you know, and then it's kind of like I write a program, I go back and I look at my checklist. Okay, well, I've got my single leg stuff, I've got my horizontal, my vertical pulling and my pushing. Okay, I've got, you know, my heavy bilateral stuff, my explosive power. Okay, I'm kind of checking all these boxes. What else do I need? Right. And then that's when you can kind of go in and be like, okay, well, you know, we really focused on like upper body strength. Right now we're kind of transitioning more into season. Okay, let's really focus on like mobility and stability of the upper body, right? Some scap work, some shoulder capsule stuff, just different things, like, because I think it's important to kind of be able to touch all those aspects, especially as you're looking at like a bigger picture. Like, did I check all my boxes or not? And I think for me, that's something really easy. That way I'm not kind of like guessing or trying to fill in, right? I think that's something I did. And I think, you know, a lot of people do it, but it's like when you first start writing a program, you're like, okay, this isn't enough. What else can I put in? Right. And so then you're like, oh, we're going to put in this, we're going to put in this and this. And then, you know, you go back and look and it's like, oh, I put all this stuff in. Well, why? Why'd you put this in? What's this for? And then, you know, you're kind of like, well, you know, we have 6 exercises on the other days. We only had 5 on this day. So I thought I had to, you know, and I think that's something that's learning is like, you don't have to have the same things every day. It doesn't have to be the same amount of work, right? Like, and it's not supposed to be, but I think just being able to like, look at it from a bigger picture and just say, did I check the boxes or did I not? And that makes it, one, clear for me, but it's very objective. It's not subjective based on like what I feel that we need, right? Like it's what I know that we need.
Where does that framework come from? Like that thought process of like, just like like the foundations that you kind of consider your, you know, elemental forms of programming, right? Like when did that kind of start to come about for you, where you kind of knew like, okay, here's what I'm looking for when it comes to training and providing programming, and whether it be in the world of, you know, strength or power, all these other qualities that you want to develop for your athletes, right? Like where is that coming? Because I think it's like everybody's got like their different like variations of it, you know what I mean? I think it's always kind of similar, right? Like you said, like push, pull, hinge, carry, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Squat, all that stuff. It's like where did that kind of start to come about for you and start to refine itself?
So, you know, like when I was at North Texas, like I think North Texas was great for me because it's like really where I learned like the coaching side of it, right? It was kind of like, okay, you want to coach? Okay, cool. Here, coach, you know, you got groups, you got kids, do it. And so I think that was really good for me because I think at the end of the day, like you can write all types of programs, you can do all type of stuff, but if you can't coach kids and you can't clearly and concisely communicate with them, good luck, right? Like you're going to have a lot of frustration. You're never really going to figure out why. Right. So I think that was a big thing for me. And then when I went to Kansas, right, like they're very big on like different types of education. Like we did a lot of stuff with Exos. We like read books, we did different stuff. And I think like the biggest thing is like when we read the system, shout out to Jack Wilson. He took us through that one. Shout out to Stu as well. Nice. But the system, right, it's Al Vermeil, Rob Panarello, and Johnny Parker. Great book. I love it. Like that was like a big game changer for me, but basically, right, like the system breaks out and it's heavily based on like Olympic weightlifting, right? And I like Olympic weightlifting and I do Olympic weightlifting and I implement it with my teams. But I think, right, like the general basis of it is like, okay, how can you make sure that you're writing a well-balanced program that is meeting the needs of what you want, right? And I think an example they use is like, you know, they went to a football program and the football program is like, oh, we're focusing on lower body strength, right? And how the system does is it basically puts different categories into boxes and you count reps. So I think there's 7 things. There's a clean, a snatch, a jerk, a squat, a post chain, a press. There might be something else that I'm forgetting. Not the best look now that I brought it up. Yeah, something like that. But right. Yeah. And so you try to, right, like you countable reps. So like all of your cleans are countable reps. All of your presses or your jerks are countable reps, right? So then when you go back and you put all these numbers and you look, right, like I think they did that with the football program. And when they broke down their program, it was actually a press program. It was a press emphasized program, right? Because you don't think about it. Okay, we're going to hit these squats at, you know, these super high percentages, we're going to go really, really heavy. Okay, well, that's great. You know, maybe you have 60 squats throughout the whole block. Okay, but if you're doing a lot of like lower intensity, higher volume pressing, right? Like, okay, we're going to hit 6x5 on bench. That's 30 reps. That's half of your total squat volume in one workout, right? So like, that's a really good framework for me. And I think just like knowing better and learning more, I kind of adapt that, right? So like, I don't snatch my girls. We don't really jerk, right? But I think you can kind of manipulate that same framework to kind of get what you want, right? Like I'm looking like, okay, this is going to be like, this is a strength focused block. We're going heavy lower body strength. Okay, great. Like I count that out and make sure I've got my squats, right? Like all my post chain stuff, that's lower body strength, right? Anything like that. That way I can go back and look and be like, okay, like this program is doing what I wanted. This program this is focused on lower body strength. Sure. Right. And I think that was a really easy way for me, right? Like I think when I first started with the first time I used it, right? Like I think they had me write a sample program at Kansas, like, hey, we want you to write a program, use the system. And I was like, there's so many numbers, right? Because it breaks down total like reps per lift, like per day, per week, per month, right? So like it breaks it down from very general and wide all the way down to like workout to workout. Sure. And so I think like once I kind of figured that out, I was like, wow, like this basically does all the work for me, right? And it gives me room to be creative because it's like, okay, I know this is what we're focusing on this block. Okay, I want to do this. Cool. How am I going to program the sets and the reps to get what I want out of it? Right. So then like, not only does it enable you to make sure that your program is focused, but also like, are you undulating the way you should? Right. Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, undulation. And then if you were to break down their program and look at it, you know, you have a 3 rep difference from week to week. That's not, I hate to break it to you. That's not undulation.
That's
you know what
enough.
I mean? And
you sure?
Yeah, it's not enough. I hate to break it to you. Yeah. So I think, right. Just giving me an idea of like, okay, like, yeah, we're in off season. These are going to be higher. Like the volumes are going to be higher because we're working towards something. Right. And then that's easy for me because as we go, it's like, okay, now we're switching our focus. Okay. Yeah. The reps are dropping on certain things. Well, that's because we're hitting higher intensities. Sure. Right. The volume is dropping because we're transitioning into like preseason. Sure. So I think that was something really easy for me just to give me a general layout. And then from there, you can kind of play around with it. Like you don't have to use the things that they've given you. Right. I think it's just like a really good framework to be like, okay, cool. Like this is kind of what I'm wanting. How am I going to get it? Yeah. And make sure that I'm getting it correctly.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm glad I asked that question now because that's an awesome answer. I didn't even really I think the first time I really started, thinking about like, all right, let's really make sure we're emphasizing what we think we're emphasizing here. Like I know I have this in the program. Like I wanted to emphasize, whatever sprinting at like shorter or longer distances. It's like I have that in there. Great. But what is that like? How much of that is represented throughout the totality of the program, right? It's like, well, like if that's your emphasis, then it should be largely, it should have a larger representation. And so, I think there was like one point, it's like, yeah, like, I think it was either Olympic lifting or it's kind of similar situation to you where it was like, someone was like, yeah, we're this type of program. So I went through, I didn't even count reps. I just counted the total number of exercises and then how many exercises, that's slotted into that category. And I'm like, dang, it's like under like 2% of the entire program. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, that can't possibly be like what we're doing, or that can't possibly be like the entire, because and like I said, it's still in there and there's still something that they want to emphasize in terms of quality. But like the amount of time spent, and distributed to that stuff, I think really matters. So it's cool and then you said that was the system, right? That was
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I haven't read that actually, but I know a ton of people spoke very highly of it as well. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I guess now that we're on like the topic then, was there anything else that's hard? I didn't mean to cut you off. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No.
Good. While we're on the topic, what are some of the other resources that you feel like have really shaped the way that you view, strength and conditioning? It could be anything from like books, podcasts, people, articles, research, whatever. It doesn't, seminars, it doesn't have to be anything in particular, but I do think it's always important. And sometimes I forget to like provide that like increased knowledge base to the people who are listening. Right. And including myself, right. I think there's so many bits of information out there and it's like, what's valuable, what isn't valuable. Well, let's see what people think have kind of changed their perspective on things. So yeah, what would those resources be for you?
Yeah. So obviously the system, that's probably like one of my top books. Love it. I think I've reread it 2 or 3 times. But I feel like, you kind of find new little pieces of information from that stuff every time you go through it. Yeah. Scientific Principles of Strength Training. That's another really good book. It basically just breaks down like different things all the way from like individual differences to just like work capacity, like breaks it down in terms of like scientific stuff. So I think that was really good for me, just like when I first started out, right? Like, yeah, I've got a master's in X Phys and I've got like a good base of that. But I think being able to learn it in a way that is relatable to what you're doing is extremely helpful. The Samson Strength Coach Collective podcast is something I
haven't heard of it. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, you might have to check it out. Yeah, that's a good one. No, but really, I'm not just saying that. I think it's good just because you have so many different people, right? And you get so many different perspectives. I think it's just good to hear, because I think sometimes we get so set in doing things a certain way, right? Whether that's how we like it, that's how we've learned it, that's what we've seen, right? But then you kind of hear these things and you're like, I didn't really think about it like that. Like, that's kind of a good idea. So I think just that, I've been pretty, like, I read Joel Jamieson, MMA Conditioning. I think that's a really good book if you're looking for just like more like detailed like ideas and just explanations of like the systems in general. Like, because I think energy system development, right? There's a lot of like conflicting ideas, right? If you get on Strength Coach Twitter, I think a couple of weeks ago there was a giant like argument on if walking was cardio or something. I have no idea.
That's been brought up on the podcast too. Some of the I think it's like 2 podcasts ago that I interviewed. I think it was Don Day. He brought it up too. He's like, he's like, something going on right now on Twitter or whatever. It's just an Instagram. It's just like walking is not cardio kind of thing. I'm like, it's getting everybody worked up. I don't even know like where it came from or whatever. I just got
no idea, but I saw it and I was like, I'm staying far away from that.
Kind of started to be second guess. I'm like, dang, because like I try to go on walks sometimes and tell myself that I'm getting my heart rate up. I'm like, that's what that's what I do in the middle of the day to get out of my desk.
You feel like you got exposed. Wait,
like,
no.
Like, who's doing that? Not me. I'm not. I ride my bike or something like that. No, I appreciate you saying that about the podcast. That is the idea. It's, different perspectives and stuff. But Joel Jamieson stuff is awesome. But I remember when I first started getting energy system work, I'm like, dang, this is so complicated and like there's just so much going on. And it's like this dimmer switch and you never really know what's on and what isn't. But I think Joel does a great job of providing that type of perspective. So that's pretty sweet. What else do you kind of like refer to right now?
I think like, especially starting out, like Mike Boyle, I think he's a really good resource. He knows a lot of stuff, right? He's been around a really long time. He's seen a lot of different things. And I mean, like, you can't really go wrong, right? Like when you think about some of those people that have been here and seen it all, like, I think, you can have different opinions, right? And like people can agree or disagree, but at the end of the day, like if you read some of his books, like the fundamental things that he is saying haven't changed, right? Whether he wrote the book 2 years ago or 10 years ago, like that stuff is still relevant and able to apply it, right? It might be in different situations or in different ways, but I think the general concepts of what he says is pretty accurate and pretty spot on. I think it's kind of something to follow. I've been getting pretty deep into like some rehabilitation stuff. I think I've got the book right here. It is Sports Prevention and Rehabilitation by David Joyce and Daniel Lewandin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And then Bridging the Gap from Rehab to Performance by Sue Falsone. Those are 2 of my current reads. But I think just trying to kind of be able to connect all those dots, right? Like I think kind of how we talked about like the PT and the ATL and that stuff, that stuff really it's a sliding scale, right? And if you were to look at long-term rehabs, right, from anything ACL, any of that stuff, right? A lot of like what the rehab is training, right? It's really, you know what I mean? It's really basic fundamental training. It's learning how to re-squat and hinge and do these different things. And so I think like being able to kind of have this like seamless transition from one thing to another, I think is the best. Is it hard to do? Yeah, I think so. Right. Like, I think it takes some time and some effort, not only from you, but just being able to like collaborate with like other support staff members that you have. But I think that is something I've really been trying to focus on. Right. And then just again, like that kind of goes back to like broadening my scope to being athletic performance, not just strength and conditioning. Cause I think there is a lot of stuff that goes into it besides just that.
And I think that sliding scale you talk about, and I know it's like you said, it's difficult, but I do think that like there are, and without even getting into like, and I'll mention a couple of like the resources that I think have helped me when it comes to like creating this collaboration. And it was ultimately the one thing that I kind of hung my hat on when I was working in college football, was like I was just wanted to see more cohesiveness, right, amongst from department to department, because I thought it would ultimately benefit the athlete. And yes, no doubt it's difficult. and then I thought like, all right, I got through like Game Changer, The Process, Governing Dynamics of Coaching, right? All these books that really outline some like technical models around how we can create more collaboration and have more, synergy between amongst departments. And then the reality is like, it just came down to the people, you know what I mean? It's like, we can have a bunch of models built around how we can create more of this, connectivity, but if you just don't have the people who have the open mind, like I feel like if you have the people, you don't even need the technical models. It's even just having more conversation around these things. Like we just talked about, like what my brother does when he's coming across an issue with a car. It's like when you have so much time spent around a certain subject, create your own model, create your own solution. You know what I mean? Get in your AT's office, like whoever your head athletic trainer is, head of sports medicine, your team doctor, like get in their office, talk to them, let them know your name, like let them know what you're about and what your thoughts are, and how you're kind of approaching your craft, and hopefully they'll do the same in return. And same for all the sport coaches you work with. So it's like, I think it is difficult, but I do think it only good things can come from that. The one sort of like pushback I got once was like, well, you just want to be careful because then you don't want to blur the lines for the athlete as to like who's controlling what. And I didn't really think about it at the time. I'm still not really sure how I feel about it. I think that would matter if the athlete wasn't necessarily sure who was handling what part of their, overall stress, I guess you could say. But I think if you do it in a way, I always thought in my mind that the athlete would look at it as like, oh, wow, this is cool. Like they all are essentially coaching my movement, right? They're just doing it in, like you said, a sliding scale in different ways, different stressors at different times, at different intensities, and different movement patterns. You know what I mean? So have you been able to kind of find some success with some of the staff that you've worked with at Rice in that context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm very lucky, and both of my athletic trainers want to collaborate, right? And we do a lot of collaboration. And I think, right, like you kind of talked about that, like blurring the lines, like they don't know where. And I think like that is like that's where you have a conversation with the athlete, right? I think sometimes like we're so worried about doing all these things and getting all these things accomplished, and we never ever like include the athlete in it, right? It's like, this is centered around the athletes and we're keeping them in the dark. They have no idea what's going on, right? So like that's an easy conversation you have with them. Hey, like we're in rehab, like this is an early stage. Usually in early stages, like this is what we're working on. We're working on like getting the inflammation down. We're working on like trying to heal the tissues, right? Like that's a lot more athletic trainer focused, right? Like that is more like rehabilitation stuff. So it's like, and then, okay, yeah, as we increase, and that's like that's a 5-10 minute conversation explaining just like a very general idea of what rehab looks like. But then, they have an idea, like one, then they're like more on top of it, right? They're like, okay, I've been through this first phase. Okay, now I'm going into the second phase. This is going to be a little bit more, right? And so that's like, hey, you're going to be a little bit more with me. She's still going to be in here. Maybe we're doing some BFR, right? So you're doing some of these like fundamental movements, but it's more in a rehab setting. Sure. Okay, cool. Like we've gone through this. Now we're in that third stage. Okay, like now this is when we are really starting to like gain some strength back. This is more in my realm, right? But I think just like being able to collaborate, but have those conversations, yes, with the support staff that you're working with, but also with the athlete, right? Just give them, that's something I found very big here, is like, if you just give them an idea of what we're doing and what's going on, you get a lot better buy-in. Because right, imagine someone telling you what to do and then not telling you why. Right, like maybe some people are okay with it. I'm very much like, well, why? Like I'm a big question. Well, why are we doing it? Why are we doing it like that? What are we going to get from it? Like, right. And I think athletes have a lot of that too. They might not just be as vocal with it, right? They might just be like, well, that's what I'm being told to do. Okay. But I think if you just give them a little bit of opportunity, right, to kind of know what's going on, then they're not in the dark anymore. They're like, oh, okay, like this is this part of rehab. Okay. Right. And I got to do it like this. Okay. We're in the second part now, we're switching it over a little bit.
No, that's great perspective. The why, right? Explaining things and actually having, a reason behind why you do things is undoubtedly going to be more buy-in with that. One question I wanted to ask before we start to wrap up, and I always forget to ask this question, I'm trying to make a little bit more part of the podcast. It's actually something I got from, I think it was Jason Hetler when I met, when I first met him, sort of this like high performance, like happy hour we were doing during COVID or something like that. It was like, you asked me this question. So if you, Dallas, were told that you needed to accomplish a specific task, and it was like, someone was just like, hey, you can bring one person with you to help you accomplish this task, but the caveat is you don't know what the task is. Like you're not being told like what it's going to be, but it's going to be super challenging. It'd be one of the most difficult things you're going to do in your life. And you can bring one person with you, but you don't know what the specific challenge is. Who would that person be?
Ooh.
It's a good one, right?
That is a good one.
Yeah.
That's hard. Ooh, I got to really think about it. If I really had to think, right, and like I'm assuming we're kind of talking in like the strength and conditioning area, right? Like, is that kind of what we're referring to? Like, you're gonna
Well,
do
no,
this?
I was thinking like when I first was asked a question, I was thinking like, okay, I'm on some like island somewhere. That would, for whatever reason, like that's what like
Yeah.
my initial thing is like, okay, if I'm thinking hard, anytime someone's like, yeah, like this is gonna be the most challenging thing you do. Like my biggest fear is like being stranded like out at sea or like on an island or something like that where I have like zero resources, right? And like
Yeah.
that's what I think would be like super challenging. It's like I need to be resourceful with like the basics and like absolutely nothing. So I always choose my dad because my dad, I swear, like the dude knows how to like break down anything and put it back together. It's just he just I don't know, he gets excited about it. Like it's just what he does. He fixes things and he'll just that was my choice. But yeah, I don't know. It's up to you. You can view how you can answer however you like.
No, I like the desert island concept going on. I'm not gonna steal your answer, but I am also gonna say my dad.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy can do anything and everything. I mean,
especially at Texas.
It's honestly crazy. Oh yeah. I mean, that guy, he can build stuff from the ground up just from like drawing it out on a notepad and being like, oh, this is what I want. These are the dimensions. And then he does it. And I'm like, what? Like, I mean, he's built full buildings like by himself, just like poured concrete, done it all. So if I was stuck on an island, I'm sure by the end of the week we would have a house and maybe some running water.
Yeah, you're either getting off that island or you're just gonna stay there and just make it home.
We're just gonna make it home. Absolutely.
Yeah, Texan girl becomes an island girl at some point. Yeah, we're just gonna make this thing happen. So, before we wrap up though, where can people find you? Like, obviously Instagram, social media, any of that stuff. Like, what just so you can get a little shout out there, a little.
I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter. I think if you just search my name, Dallas Skipper, it'll pop up. I don't really think I've been super creative with any of my usernames.
It's a pretty unique name too. I don't think many people have your name. So
I'm not really going to forget it. Yeah, it'll pop up. I'm not super great at posting content. I'll be honest. I post a lot of stories. Trying to get a little bit better about even trying to post like some training stuff, hoping we can do some we use a lot of sports science here. So hoping maybe at some point we can kind of post a little bit more about that. But just trying to be a little bit better. I know it's such a big thing nowadays. And like, that's so many people just showcase everything on social media. So I'm trying to be a little bit better about it. But if anyone follows me from this, don't get your hopes up because you'll probably be disappointed.
That's an incredible sell job right there. Yeah, follow me, but don't get your hopes up because I don't.
Yeah, don't get too excited. Yeah.
Well, Dallas, this was awesome. I really appreciate you hopping on and giving us your time for sure. Any final words for the Samson listeners?
Man, I mean, honestly, just thanks again for letting me come on here. It's great. Love hearing from people. Love talking shop with people. So if anyone wants to reach out, have any questions or just things they want to talk about, I'd love to.
That's awesome.
I think that's how we get better, is just being able to talk to other people and kind of constantly improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we appreciate you. And well, for the listeners, we'll catch you guys next time. But again, thank you, Dallas. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.